now that we've gone over some of the really key sections of the proposal, we're going to sort of take a little bit more of a bird's eye view of the application as a whole and share some insider tips for your grant submission. And that's because grant proposals are not just about great writing, although they are very much about that too. Of course, they're also about sort of the preparation that you put into your application as a whole and managing your own application and being as precise as you can in that process. So the first tip that we have here is to make sure that you are following all formatting guidelines meticulously. And that's because each funding agency is going to have its own requirements and its own expectations. So really make sure that you're going through those guidelines and those expectations, making sure that you are, for example, staying within word counts, page counts, even setting your font or your typeface to what the agency has requested if there is such a request, things like this. So just making sure that all that formatting is really in place the way that the agency wants it. The next tip here is to really double check your submission deadline. Missing a submission deadline is kind of one of those mistakes that you can't really bounce back from. So you really want to make sure that you have your calendar laid out, that you can, making sure that you're meeting all deadlines, whether it's the one-time deadline for sort of submitting the final version of the application or any deadlines that are sort of part of the process of getting to that point. And just really making sure that you're checking all those deadlines. If you're able to, building in some buffer periods for any unexpected delays, making sure that you're not kind of pushing things right to the last minute and submitting on deadline, but trying to submit before deadline if possible. And even if all goes smoothly, you can save yourself a lot of headache and mental anguish by not kind of rushing things at the end, right? So just really making sure that you're keeping on top of your timelines for your application. The next, you want to make sure that you're avoiding common pitfalls. These will include things like, for example, vague objectives, or maybe on the other hand, objectives that are kind of too overambitious or maybe unrealistic. So making sure that your objectives are pitched appropriately. You want to avoid, again, as I already discussed, either poorly or incorrectly formatted proposals that don't follow the set guidelines, as well as things like insufficient justifications for your project's feasibility. Remember that your readers are really looking for clarity and they're looking for thoroughness. So make sure that your application is kind of meeting those standards. Last, continually seek feedback from colleagues and mentors who are able to provide constructive feedback. As writers, if you're looking over our own writing and our own projects, you stop seeing it after a while, right? You become too kind of overfamiliar. So having that extra set of eyes is super important to kind of identify gaps, weaknesses, also strengths, right? Other people telling you kind of what your application is doing well is also really great feedback to have. So just make sure that you're seeking feedback continually as you kind of work through this process. And here we have some even more tips. So I'm going to sort of tackle these column by column. So we'll start at the top on the left here. This is really important. You want to make sure that your application is really explaining and articulating how your research plans are actually going to enable the impacts that you're anticipating. As Sonal covered, funding agencies are really looking at things like impact. They're more likely to fund projects that are able to articulate what kind of impact you anticipate your research having. And in addition to that impact, again, this kind of hits that question of the feasibility of the project, making sure that your plans, your methodology is actually going to realistically enable those impacts that you anticipate. So this is something that you really want to make sure that you're honing in on as you write and then sort of revise and continually revise and update your application and other documents. Next, ensure that you're including things like recruitment, staff, and volunteer time among your costs. These maybe fall into some of those indirect costs that Sonal had mentioned on the budgeting slide. Sometimes it's easy, when it comes to kind of, staffing or kind of, human labor. Sometimes it's easy to forget that these are real costs that are built into these kinds of projects. So just being really aware of kind of some of these more hidden costs, including like the time that you're asking yourself and your team members to put into a project like this is really vital. Next, you'll want to sort of identify evaluation processes that you have in place. So this means sort of as the project is developing, when, let's say you get the grant and you're actually conducting the research, making sure that you have a clear sense of kind of how things are moving forward, what the progress is like, anticipating any kind of expected or unexpected setbacks that may occur. If you have the kind of project where, Phase two is going to really kind of directly depend on a certain kind of result coming out of phase one. But let's say, you don't get the results that you anticipated from phase one. You want to really make sure that you are clear about kind of how you're going to approach phase two in the event of maybe an unexpected setback or just results that you didn't anticipate. So putting those kinds of guardrails on your own research and being able to kind of articulate, how am I going to get from A to B to C kind of throughout the duration of this project is really important. So building some sense of that into your application will show your reader that you have sort of thought about this and that you have a sense of kind of what the project is going to look like as a whole and kind of how the component parts are going to fit together, including anticipating any potential setbacks. Next, as I said already, seek feedback from colleagues, and I think especially from those who are kind of outside of your own area of expertise. It's actually more likely than not that your reader or just one of the several readers who are looking at your application are not going to be subject matter experts in the same field that you are conducting research in. So it's really key that your application is clear and legible to somebody who is not in your sort of specific area of expertise. To do this, you want to avoid jargon as much as you can. If you do have any kind of jargon or complex terms, you want to make sure that you're explaining what those are to somebody who might not be familiar. What those terms mean, what they entail, what the context is. So seeking feedback from colleagues who are not in your own area can really help you to identify some of those things that might not make so much sense to somebody who's not in your own area of study. Next, and this might seem obvious, but it really is important to bear in mind as you produce your application. Make sure that your team has the full range of personal, professional, and technical skills to actually undertake the research and everything that the research is going to entail. Again, might sound obvious, but it's important to keep in mind that you want your team to not only have that academic background and that research area expertise, but also even the interpersonal skills, right, that are needed to carry out important and kind of sustained and maybe long-term research. So making sure that everyone on your team is going to be able to handle conflict in a productive way, or be team players, and everybody's going to kind of do their part to help move the project forward. And finally, you want to try to provide as much information as you can in your application regarding the specific audiences with whom you intend to engage, and perhaps the audiences or populations that you're doing research on behalf of. The rationale for your choice of activities, the expected benefits of these engagements, the expected timescale, as well as the expected outcomes and how you might go about identifying and wherever possible, even quantifying those outcomes.